Some people don't run from the world because they hate it. They step away because silence feels like safety, and stillness, a kind of truth. There is something sacred about being unseen, a peace in not having to explain oneself. For them, solitude isn't loneliness, it's recovery. It's the quiet between storms, where they can finally hear their own voice without the static of expectation. The world calls it withdrawal, but they know it as returning to the self, to clarity, to calm. This is not a story about people who avoid others. It's a story about people who have learned that peace often whispers in empty rooms, and that sometimes the safest place is simply the space between themselves and the noise. There are people who walk into a crowded room and feel something in them tighten, a quiet wish to disappear. Not because they dislike others, but because every voice, every glance, every expectation feels like weight pressing on a fragile peace. In a world that glorifies noise, their silence is often misunderstood. They listen more than they speak. They observe the smallest details, the flicker in someone sip's eyes, the tremor behind a smile, and it all lingers in them, deeper than most can imagine. When they finally return home and close the door behind them, a sigh escapes, one that doesn't belong to tired lungs, but to the soul itself. The still air feels different, safe, unjudging, whole. This safety is not dramatic. It doesn't come with epiphanies or revelations. It's subtle, like sinking into warm water after standing in the cold too long. A place where the mind stops performing, where the heart stops explaining. In solitude, there is no need to measure words or facial expressions. No pressure to mirror energy or chase belonging. Just the quiet hum of existing, without audience, without noise. And maybe that sits the unspoken truth of it all. Some people don't seek solitude as escape. They seek it because the world feels too sharp, and they've learned that peace sometimes lives only in the spaces where no one else enters. For them, being alone is not about being apart. It's about being real, stripped of the need to be anyone at all. Before solitude became sanctuary, it was survival. It began quietly, in small rooms, in childhood corners, in the invisible spaces between attention and absence. Some learned early that the world outside was unpredictable. That peace depended on stillness. That silence kept the air from cracking. A child who grows up sensing tension before it's spoken often learns to shrink, to observe rather than disrupt. They read moods before words, footsteps before anger, tone before truth. And so they begin to retreat inward, into a landscape only they can understand. In that private space, they build safety out of imagination. They talk to thoughts instead of people. They draw, read, daydream, not as hobbies, but as shelters. Every quiet activity becomes a small escape hatch from chaos. For others, it begins differently. Not in fear, but in misalignment. The child who feels different, too thoughtful, too quiet, too soft, in a world that rewards loudness, learns early to adapt by disappearing. Not to hide, but to stay intact. In these early years, solitude becomes familiar. Not a punishment, but a pattern. It's where they first taste the relief of control, the comfort of not needing to impress, defend, or decode someone else's emotions. By the time they grow older, the body remembers this language of stillness. It becomes a rhythm. Retreat, recover, return. To others, it may look like distance, but to them, it feels like returning home to something ancient and safe. A self that existed long before noise, before expectation, before the need to be understood. The pull towards solitude is not only emotional, it is biological. The brain, too, seeks silence. When overstimulation floods the senses, the nervous system begins to tighten. Cortisol rises, heart rate quickens, attention fragments. For many, this tension is background noise, something to brush off. But for sensitive or introverted minds, it becomes a storm that never stops. Neuroscientists call it sensory gating, the brain's ability to filter unnecessary information. For some people, that filter is thinner. Every flicker of light, every tone in someone's voice, every hidden emotion seeps through. Their mind registers what others miss, and in doing so, exhausts itself faster. So when they retreat into solitude, they are not escaping life. They are regulating it. The quiet room, the gentle routine, the absence of noise. These are not habits of avoidance, but acts of neurological care. Psychologists link this pattern to the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural rest and restore mode. When alone, breathing deepens. The mind begins to organize scattered thoughts. Cognitive energy shifts from defense to reflection. That's why solitude can feel like clarity. The brain, freed from vigilance, finally begins to process emotion instead of surviving it. There is also a deeper psychology at play. Those who prefer solitude often score higher in self-awareness and emotional sensitivity. They think in layers. They feel in subtleties. And this complexity, while beautiful, can make social life overwhelming. Too many signals, too much noise, too little time to decode it all. In solitude, everything slows. The inner world, once drowned by stimulation, rises to the surface. Not to isolate them, but to remind them that peace and understanding are often born in quiet rooms. There is a strange duality in those who find safety in solitude. They long for connection, yet flinch when it arrives. They crave understanding, yet feel exposed when someone tries to offer it. It sets not a contradiction. It sets self-preservation. Inside them lives a quiet tension between two voices. One whispers, "You stir better off alone." The other replies, "But you're human. You need to be seen." This is the invisible battle. The heart reaches outward, the mind pulls back in. Each attempt to open up feels like walking barefoot across glass. Delicate, cautious, aware that warmth can sometimes lead to wounds. So they become careful curators of presence. They give just enough to appear open, but never enough to risk collapse. Conversations stay shallow, not from disinterest, but from fatigue. The cost of being fully known feels too high, too uncertain. Guilt often follows. They wonder if they are broken, if something in them is missing, a social muscle others were born with. But the truth is softer. They simply learned that peace demands protection. Psychologists describe this as avoidant coping, a defense built from repetition. When vulnerability once led to pain, the mind associates safety with distance. And yet, even knowing this doesn't stop the ache of loneliness. It only explains it. Sometimes they'll watch others laugh together and feel both envy and relief. Envy for the ease of belonging. Relief for not having to perform it. They exist in the in-between, where connection feels dangerous and isolation feels incomplete. And while the world praises openness, they quietly wrestle with the truth that sometimes safety and solitude are still the same word. One day, the quiet doesn't feel like hiding anymore. It feels like choosing. The walls that were once protected now begin to soften, not because the world has changed, but because they have. They start to see solitude not as separation, but as space. Space to breathe, to think, to return to themselves without apology. This is the subtle turning point. It rarely comes with grand awakenings. More often, it arrives in ordinary moments. A morning walk where the mind feels clear. A conversation that doesn't sit drain. A pause where silence feels kind, not lonely. They realize that their distance was never about others. It was about energy. About conserving what the world kept taking without asking. They begin to understand that protecting peace is not the same as rejecting love. It sups a boundary, not a barricade. From this clarity grows something gentle, self-trust. The understanding that solitude is a tool, not a sentence. It can heal, but it can also be confined. And when used with awareness, it becomes both shield and bridge. This awareness changes the rhythm of their days. They no longer fear being alone. But they also stop fearing closeness. They start to see connection as something to flow into, not drown in. A place where they can remain themselves, even when seen. There is power in realizing that solitude doesn't have to end for connection to begin. That one can carry the calm of silence into the noise of the world. Anchored, centered, unshaken. And for the first time, being alone and being alive feel like the same thing. Reconnection doesn't begin with crowds. It begins with small openings, soft, almost invisible gestures toward the world. A quiet hello returned. A brief moment of eye contact was held instead of avoided. An unexpected laugh that escapes before the mind can silence it. Healing rarely arrives with noise. It arrives in moments that feel safe enough to stay. Those who once found safety only in solitude begin to notice something subtle. That peace can exist with others too, if the pace is slow and the space is kind. They learn that connection doesn't have to drain. It can also restore. Not every conversation needs performance. Not every presence demands surrender. They start choosing people who feel like silence, the ones who listen more than they speak, who understand pauses, who never rush to fill the quiet. Around such people, solitude isn't lost, it's shared. Psychologically, this stage marks a shift from protective withdrawal to secure autonomy. The nervous system, once guarded, learns that not all closeness equals danger, that stillness can survive even within a company. It's the brain rewiring safety, not as absence of others, but as presence of peace. And so, they begin to balance both worlds. Time alone becomes nurturing, not numbing. Time with others becomes intentional, not overwhelming. They no longer hide from noise, they manage its distance. Reconnection for them is not about returning to who they were before solitude. It's about becoming someone new, someone who can love silence and sound in equal measure. Because healing, at its quiet core, is not about leaving solitude behind. It's about carrying its calm wherever they go. In the end, solitude is not emptiness. It is a rhythm. A slow, steady pulse beneath the noise of living, the body's way of remembering itself. Those who find safety there are not escaping the world. They are listening to it differently. They have learned that silence is not the absence of life, but the backdrop against which life becomes clear. In solitude, thoughts breathe. Memories soften. The self, once buried under the weight of reaction, rises gently to the surface. Here, they learn to hear the small music of being, the hum of the refrigerator at night, the wind brushing through curtains, their own heartbeat, steady, patient, alive. It's a symphony most people overlook, too distracted by the rush. But for those who sit quietly long enough, the silence begins to sing. And within that song, they discover something eternal. The peace they sought was never outside of them. It was never in people, or places, or perfect moments. It lived, quietly, beneath all of it, a soundless truth waiting for their attention. They still move through the world. They love, they work, they speak. But now, they do it differently. Every action is anchored in calm. Every connection, chosen. Every word, deliberate. Because once you have known the language of solitude, you never forget it. You carry it like a melody, a quiet score playing beneath every conversation, reminding you that silence is not loneliness, and stillness is not retreat. It is presence, pure, unguarded, and whole.